Okay, so we are after Gender Recognition Act deadline, and that was never my focus. Anyway, so for me, this is big happy occasion. So, first of all, my Arius Dark List has hooked itself up to explosives. The left have hooked themselves into self-ID because it's about protection over the identify as your representation. These are our disciplines, this is our elite cultures. Everybody is kind of, you know, all the institutions, you know, academia has demonstrated that they do not have the understanding or the awareness of the legal frameworks that are covered by the systems that I'm discussing. The tension between the forces shaping systems and the belief system shaping systems is becoming apparent as that belief system falls apart. That's all happening in academia and elite institutions. That's fuck all to do with me. Now, my concern is the consolidation of a bunch of duties which are just consolidating. Like this was always going to happen. So there's a whole bunch of changes that happened in the 20th century. So there were changes to family structure, which went from a system of ownership to one where women were actually legally obliged to protect themselves from abuse and end the family unit. You know, our welfare economics never caught up to duties to children or had any awareness of the rule of law. It's filed firmly in belief system going kaput, even though that's what shaped our welfare system. And we have to learn how it's connected to other systems. So our local authorities are failing, which is terrible, but actually should have been expected as part of their life cycle. This is only the first cycle for many of those duties. These are duties that can't be abdicated, and we're seeing the process by which political crises are generated, which fix an understanding of those duties at an elite level. And we've just seen how the self-ID crisis did that. So nobody thought they were fighting trans activists for safeguarding, but it was actually safeguarding in the rule of law around power dynamics, how it's held up, how male violence shapes systems. Even intersectionality is a theoretical concept showing how systems reproduce power relations, have all been brought into relief by the self-ID crisis. Now, the crisis that I'm looking at is essentially the redefinition of the post-war settlement. So it hasn't happened for 70 years, so it's very, 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 very important. And Brexit is the framework that we have for it. And through Brexit, we have to reconcile our identity with where we actually are in the world. We have to unpick our international relations, while the two major powers that kept us stable are getting tension between them, and the world is looking east, and we have to adjust to our new position in the world. This is happening in a period where a policy reflex through austerity targeted the systems that we've now got acknowledgement that our elite institutions, the Guardian, our trade unions, couldn't see. These ones around the rule of law. And it's that rule of law that I'm concerned with. So the self-ID crisis is one aspect of a multi-dimensional, massive as fuck crisis that I'm looking at. And what's going to happen over the next year or so is, in much the same way as the self-ID crisis has, other institutional failure and crisis like Grenfell is one such crisis, shows you how systems are connected and what they do, and exposes the rule of law. And along with a whole bunch of other crises like the child abuse inquiry and, you know, but Brexit is the overarching framework that we have. The self-ID crisis is one aspect of it, which has brought attention to the rule of law and how it's upheld and blind spots to that. And I thought it might be worth outlining the rule of law that will become exposed through this crisis. So I'm going to be looking at the actual rule of law contained within institutions, civil service institutions, serving the Crown, the structure of those institutions, because that's really important, because that's a rule of law that policymakers have always just assumed would be the filter for policy, and it's actually those institutions that are eroded, so we don't have any tools for what happens when these break down, and that's the process that we're in. I'm also going to look at the law that's emerged around adults and capacity and social care. And I'm going to look at that and the principles that we've been applying to social care, because that's a major as fuck crisis. And the way that these systems actually differ from the belief system that we've got shaping our institutions, which is quite significantly. And how we can fix that, because these crises will push us to fix and correct these things. And I'm going to do the same for children, and I'm going to look at children's law. And what should happen is, over the course of many different political crises, institutional breakdown, fallout from self-ID, is this rule of law should become apparent. Now, the reason it's important at this point in time is because this crisis is so big that what will definitely be exposed is the rule of law that we're keeping, which is the stuff that I'm concerned with. What will also be exposed by the crisis is the context that's changed around systems, around the economics we've been using, which is the systems that I'm discussing, to do with abuse and violence. And these are actually very relatively recent systems. But what we'll also do through this crisis is we will have to accommodate shifts that have already happened, which is all the shifts that I'm already discussing. So the changing role of women in the 20th century and the emancipation of us from ownership in a family meant the emergence of legal and institutional responsibilities to protect from violence. But it also meant changes to birth rate and lifespan and demographic shifts and major, major stuff. And so we can't get out of this crisis, and we never could, until we got to the point where we acknowledged those changes. But those changes are about women, and it needed one teeny, weeny little spark. And it needed women to stand up, which we've already done. So, unlike at other times, when activism is about saying down with this sort of thing, we're really fucked off, what we have to now do is make sure that these duties are consolidated, and all the rights that women won in the 20th century, we now have to consolidate. So what I'm going to do with this playlist is to open up kind of your understanding, I hope, a little bit of the rule of law that's going to be exposed by crisis, so you can see how the self-ID crisis did that, and see how that goes with other crises. And then you can maybe look at what I think are going to often seem like overwhelming crises. I know that actually there is some order and some sense to it all. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm going to watch it back.